Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Hello, and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. May 15th, 2025, just a modest $400 million gift edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast here in Washington, D.C. No one has given me a $400 million gift, or even like a $1 million gift, which I would definitely settle for. Hint, hint. Nudge, nudge.
You are a gift to all of us.
Are you for sale?
Yeah, absolutely. Are you not? Is there no price? Have you never played that game?
I've definitely played that game.
There's definitely a price. There's definitely a price. I don't think there is for either of you. I'm going to be honest.
Oh my God. Of course there is.
I don't think so. From the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School, not for sale, Emily Bazelon.
Hey, guys.
I mean, it depends whether you mean price in monetary terms or like
something else.
Threaten your family kind of thing.
I don't feel like a threat is the same thing because, of course, threat you behave differently. It's more like what would you sell out for material gain or sort of glory, fame, material gain, not to avoid punishment of those you love. I don't think either of you is for sale. That is John Dickerson, co-anchor of CBS Evening News and anchor of CBS Evening News Plus. Definitely not for sale, CBS listeners and readers and watchers.
Hi.
This week on the Gabfest, a free plane, a wide array of crypto shadiness, golf course deals aplenty. The scale of President Trump's corruption is extraordinary. Will he pay any price for it? Will it be constrained at all? Then the Supreme Court hears arguments in the first case involving the Trump administration's effort to limit birthright citizenship. Then, was there a cover-up of Biden's frailty and mental decline? And if so, did it cost Democrats the presidency? We'll talk about the topic that all of Washington is obsessed with this week. Plus,
it's a buzz. It's a buzz.
Yes. A buzz. I actually have a buzz in my notes.
Yeah.
Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. The scale of corruption in Trump's second term is turning out to be quite lung-bustingly enormous. He is apparently going to accept the gift of a plane from Qatar, a plane that may then be his to use for his presidential library. A library doesn't need a plane, as far as I know. A person uses a plane. That is part of that country of Qatar's multi-billion-dollar, like really many multi-billion-dollar effort to curry favor and buy influence in the U.S. and around the world. The Trump and Trump family members have established several crypto ventures that have the potential to enormously enrich him and his family and cronies, and allow people or foreign governments to directly channel money to them or indirectly channel money to them, including this kind of shocking quid pro quo that appears to be taking place where 25 large buyers of the Trump meme coin are going to get private access to the president. At least 19 of them appear to be foreign entities or foreign people. Also, his sons are going around the world inking deals for golf courses and resorts that are going to enrich the family massively. There's also separately, although this is more like the norm, the entire shady DC business of people who are now hiring Trump-connected people to grease deals. So it's, there are bits of it that are similar to things that have happened in the past, that are bits that are just not really similar. And insofar as they are similar, they are wildly off the scale of what has happened in the past. So, John, you have looked at this kind of issue for your whole professional career. What about what Trump is doing is new, and what is the norm? And in what's new, what is offensive to the American tradition?
What a great way to frame it. central challenge here, one of them anyway, is always that you don't want a system of government where people with more money and power have access to a president and the machinery of government than the rest of the country. So so when campaign fundraising becomes such a part of maintaining political power or gaining political power, that crowds out public service. And it also creates a system where, in order for you to succeed, people gain access to you just because of their power and money, not because of the rightness of their cause or because their cause has been vetted by the democratic system or anything like that. So it perverts the core functioning and healthy functioning of democracy. So that's one of the basic cases. Obviously, on the foreign policy front, that has life and death consequences, because you might turn a blind eye to what a country is doing when it comes to aggression, or you might not care about the suffering of people in that country, which is inconsistent with your values about caring about human lives and other things. So there's also a foreign policy element to that kind of corruption. The foreign part of the corruption is usually more muffled because of laws that presidents have not tried to break. There are all kinds of different ways that the influence game gets sorted for foreign entities, but it's harder. There's more obstacles in the system. This removes those obstacles and creates a clean, smooth pathway. And it also creates a clean, smooth pathway for domestic access peddling and influence peddling at a level that is many multiples of what we've seen before. So for a president, it means the president's time and attention is allocated towards people with power and money whose interests are, in some cases, directly the opposite of the people the president is supposed to serve. I would then also add that it creates a system here in which you kind of perfect the swamp. This is the professionalization of the swamp. What is the idea of the swamp? That the creatures of Washington have special systems and access that regular people don't have. This creates a gold-plated, beautiful, enormous, multi-room mansion of swamp dwelling. And that only, of course, invites more of this kind of behavior once you get away with it. And then finally, like many things where the president is doing, is plowing new ground, it reinforces the fact that Congress and the leaders in Congress are totally supine. If you listen to Speaker Mike Johnson explain why this didn't bother him, despite his obsession and the obsession of other Republican leaders with what they called the Biden crime family, it was quite a thing to behold how he danced around really caring about any of this at all. So it reinforces the idea that the president is primal here and that Congress does nothing to stop him, even though they have a role. So I would say those are some of the challenges.
In the perfecting of the swamp, I mean, one of the aspects that is almost laughable is the person who kind of gives the ethics clearance for President Trump to accept this $400 million plane as a new Air Force One is the Attorney General Pam Bondi, who has been recently a paid retained lobbyist to the government of Qatar. You couldn't get any more ridiculous and swampy and corrupt than that. But Emily, I guess I would say, all right, so Trump's argument is, why not accept a plane who looks a gift horse in the mouth? And we do want Qatar to do things that benefit the United States. And we do want Qatar to be friendly to us and pursue things that benefit the United States. And if they give us a plane, isn't that a nice thing to do? And what's the problem with that? We do want countries to suck up to us and be nice to us.
Well, there's a few things going on, right? There's the question of whether Qatar is really giving this plane to the United States or in a veiled way to Trump himself, because the idea of this plane is he's going to use it and then it's going to go to his presidential library. And he has suggested that maybe he won't fly in it himself at that point, but there's absolutely no guarantee of that. One expects that down the line he absolutely would do so. And even if he doesn't, just having it parked at his presidential library is like a paean, a sign of his glory, right? So that still is about him personally. And then I think the second issue here is always with the quid, what's the quo? Like, what is the transaction that Qatar expects? Gifts like this are seem like inevitably they would have some strings attached. And indeed, when you look at the United States relationship with Qatar, we are selling them billions of dollars worth of military equipment. And also potentially looking the other way in their hosting of groups like Hamas and other things that they're doing in the world. You could ask yourself whether that kind of transaction would be happening anyway, I suppose, right? There are reasons that make sense to the Trump administration to be doing those things that have nothing to do with the $400 million jumbo jet or the $5.5 billion deal for, resort golf land that Qatar is building with the Trump organization. But when you see those things mixed together, at least there is a clear appearance of impropriety, and that in itself is a marker of corruption. The idea that we can all see that, it's very clear, and then Congress is just shrugging it off.
Yeah, I think you can create different categories here. I think you could make a total case that the plane is connected with a new kind of highly transactional Trump approach to foreign policy, which was matched with the speech he gave in Saudi Arabia, in which he said that American presidents found themselves afflicted, his word, by the idea that it was our job, meaning a president's job, to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use U.S. policy to dispense justice for their sins. This was in Saudi Arabia, where
he did not write that line. Somebody.
No, that's Stephen Miller, where the Crown Prince has been accused by U.S. intelligence of ordering the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. So if you're going to be highly transactional for U.S. national interest purpose, national interest, which previous presidents have had to be, and you can make a case for it, then okay, you accept the plane, you engage in the sliminess of the way other countries behave in the service of U.S. interests. But all the meme coin stuff and all of the coordinating Trump, all of the crypto stuff and all of the, opening up of a Trump family hotel in Dubai, a golf club in Qatar, in Abu Dhabi, having a $2 billion investment from a firm backed by Abu Dhabi. That's all in coordination and coincidental with the president's travel. That is in a different category.
Can I say one more thing about that different category? Sorry, which is that it's a scammy category. It's like Trump University. I mean, crypto, these meme coins, it's all about a few people making a lot of money over whoever gets left holding the bag at the end.
And I think even with the transactional stuff, the problem, if it were transactional and there was some grand strategic purpose that you could perceive and discern in what they're doing, then you could say, like, okay, great. I mean, we got this plane. We approved their LNG permits for the liquefied natural gas facility in Texas that Qatar is backing. They've got some American weaponry that maybe they should or shouldn't have. It's all, but we have a strategy around it. Then you would say, okay, this transactionalism it's a new way of doing business. It's not the Biden way, but it's a different way. But I think that it's not attached to any apparent strategy. It is attached to the usual whims and impulsiveness of Trump. And it's like with a child. I mean, it's really like the way you buy off a child with a toy. Trump is so impulsive and is so wrapped up in his own personal glory that everyone knows, like, you just give him the personal glory and then whatever it is that they want, they can get, because there is no grand U.S. strategy at the moment, apparently.
Well,
it doesn't appear to
Qatar
be.
has a relationship with Hamas, and Idan Alexander was just released as a result of negotiations with the United States. And
and he's the last American hostage.
That's right. Now, I'm not drawing a connection between those two, but it's not insane to think that a cozy relationship with Qatar and turning a blind eye to Qatar's support of Hamas, which is, by the way, a lot more severe than the things that people who've had their student visas revoked for being a danger to U.S. foreign policy have done. But that's a bit of a side road. But you can imagine a way in which relationships with Qatar are helpful.
I'm not saying that relationships with Qatar aren't helpful. I think they're absolutely helpful, for sure. I'm just saying that it could just as easily have been Uruguay that was doing this.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
It could just as easily have been, Myanmar. It could be any country in the world could be doing it, and they would get something out of it. And it wouldn't be congruent with U.S. interests, because there is no cohesive Trump policy about what U.S. interests are. U.S. interests are whatever his whims are at the moment, and he will accept.
That's quite cohesive. It's just not in national political. It's not in public interest.
Yeah. Yes.
Good point. I can't let this topic go without mentioning the emoluments clause, because I am not willing to let go of the idea that it is not legal for him to accept this plane. We do have a part of the Constitution that says that presidents may not accept emoluments. The problem is we can't figure out how to enforce it. When people sued in Trump's first term, the lawsuits kicked around for a while, and then finally they just were dismissed by the Supreme Court as being moot because Trump was out of office. The real party who clearly have standing here to challenge are Congress. And so if you don't have Congress sticking up for itself and sticking up for its rules about gifts, I mean, the statute, forget the Constitution, that Congress passed suggests that presidents are not allowed to keep gifts that cost more than $480.
$480 million. Emily. $480 million.
$480, less than $500. And so the subterfuge here for whatever legal authorization Pam Bondi gave Trump is this idea that then the plane goes to the library and not to him personally. But it's a farce. The problem is that, it is one of so many examples where it's illegal, but Trump can probably still do it anyway, unless Congress stands up for itself. There is just a limitation here on what lawsuits and the judicial branch can accomplish.
So there's this line that Republicans use. First of all, there are some Republicans who are saying that the plane deal is icky. So that's nice that there are at least a couple who are willing to say that. But there is this line that so many Republicans use. I think Speaker Mike Johnson used it, which is basically, President Trump is rich. He would never act for his own personal gain. He doesn't need it. In fact, he has made this enormous personal sacrifice. He's given up a life of luxury to be president, this terrible job. And how could you ever think that this person who is already so rich would ever do anything that was designed to increase his wealth? And it's so obviously, it's like such an obvious, grotesque misreading of Trump or intent. Like, do you think they actually believe this? Could they possibly believe this? Here's a person who's literally never not acted for his own personal gain or glory. He's put it ahead of everything else. And yet they say this stuff as though they actually somehow believe it. It
is part of Trump's appeal that some people do believe that about him, right? And I do have this question every time I read one of these stories, which is I don't understand. If you have so much money, what is even the point? But I think that's dumb.
Have you ever never met a rich person?
No, right. I realize that it's just sort of dumb. It's not how they think. I mean, maybe if you hang out with Elon Musk and he's the wealthiest, then you have this idea that 10 billion or 15 or 20 billion is nothing compared to however much. It just is. I don't understand it. It seems so disconnected to what would actually make you happy or change your life in a meaningful way.
Well, you may have a different value structure than those.
I just might.
I mean, it is not. It is not. It is not absent from human history that people create flamboyant arenas for lavish displays in honor of them, and that's what you can imagine all of this being. In other words, it's not so much the dollar figures; it's the extraordinary calisthenics performed in front of the king. I mean, so giving a plane is a pretty clever gift. Not every other president has been given a plane. If you're excited by accumulation, there are not many other routes to the kind of baubles that you get when you're a president.
Right. And baubles and, as you say, John, this display of dominance, this chance to force other people to be subservient. I mean, it is literally paying tribute. It is and it's, it reflects, there's this emptiness, there's this void, this vacuum in the core of Trump, which he tries to fill with making people subservient to him, with wealth, with, gaudiness, with just the constant display. But it's because there's an emptiness, and we are all paying the price for that emptiness.
But I think the argument, which I think somebody more clever than me could sustain, and that we don't have evidence yet for, but if you engage in highly transactional relationships with a part of the world that has been a constant challenge for the United States and the globe, and that highly transactional set of behaviors gets some things done, I'm now in the realm of fantasy, but I think you could. It's not inconceivable that you could come up with a narrative for how this helps U.S. national security interests. It doesn't help to create a smooth system of influence peddling. It doesn't help to create yet another instance for Congress to be supine, and it doesn't help the people whose human rights are being trampled and destroyed in those countries that used to think of the United States as their protector. So I'm not saying it's not without costs, but I think you could imagine that there is a way in which long-term U.S. national security interests would not be harmed by this new transactional set of relationships.
That's a really fair point.
I just
totally
want to point out
that.
that what if they're also sneaking, though, some surveillance equipment and spyware onto this plane?
They have, that's one of the things. Ed O'Keefe did a piece for us where he went and the amount of money it will cost to scrub the plane, first of all, to make sure that what you say, Emily, is not the case. And then secondly, to outfit it in with all the things that a president needs would be hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's not even...
well, we're going to spend it. I look forward. I'm opening my pocketbook now and writing a blank check.
Before we go leave this topic, let's just return to the crypto aspect of it. It is this very speculative instrument. No evidence it is creating any value except by allowing shady characters to launder money, essentially. Trump has now taken away almost all regulation on crypto. And so the kind of even the most scammy aspects of it are now pretty in the clear. Why is it disturbing to you, Emily, that the Trump family is so heavily involved in these various crypto businesses that are enriching them and giving people access to Trump?
I mean, I just think people are going to get fleeced, and it's going to line the pockets of the super wealthy people who deal in this unregulated, shady part of the economy that isn't really attached to anything, right? The whole idea of cryptocurrency is that it's not, there is no country standing behind it with a mint of any kind. It's just kind of free floating out there. And it depends on the psychology of people buying into it, which means that it can turn into a giant Ponzi scheme, and whoever's left holding the bag can be left with something with very little value. It's not as if the Trump organization and Trump family doesn't have a history of this kind of investment. It does.
And that foreign actors can pump up its value, getting around U.S. Restrictions on, giving money essentially to presidents. And Bloomberg did an analysis that found 56% of the leaderboards of the top 220 holders of, I can't remember which coin it is.
The Trump meme coin.
Trump meme coin are foreign, are from outside the United States, and that's even more true of the top 25 who have been, who are now a part of essentially an overt money raising scheme, where they get a VIP tour. I can't remember if the VIP tour is of the White House or not, but essentially,
I think they've gone back and forth on that.
I don't think it's of the White House. I thought it was.
I think it turned into Mar-a-Lago.
I think it was a golf course.
There's the Virginia golf.
But it was going to be the White House. That's why you were thinking that.
Okay, yeah. It's the Virginia golf course, but there was a special VIP tour that was advertised.
Yeah, I mean, at its best, it's a piggy bank and influence peddling. At its worst, it manages to destabilize the whole world economy in some way that sounds like apocalyptic and maybe ridiculous now, but these things, they don't stay within our control.
And look, I don't have a lot of love for Trump's doing real estate deals as president and the Trump family doing real estate deals. But the thing about a real estate deal and building a golf course is at the end of it, you have a golf course and a resort, and people like it and they go to it, and that either succeeds or it doesn't. It's a real physical object. And so there is some specific performance that you have to do as Trump to kind of get this thing built, and it does have an actual presence. The meme coin is just pure. It is pure fleecing of people. It is pure speculation. It is not attached to any actual useful function. It is not improving anything in the world. It is not changing anything in the world. It is not adding 18 more holes of golf to Qatar. It is doing nothing except giving certain people the right to transfer money to the Trump family and then use that access that they get for who knows what. Through the magic of temporal distortion, we've reconvened later on Thursday to do our second topic, which is about the emergency argument at the Supreme Court over the Trump administration's efforts to limit birthright citizenship. Well, actually, it's not over that, but birthright citizenship, a well-established constitutional right, is under challenge from the Trump administration. They want to deny it to people living without documents in the United States. There's an emergency case at the Supreme Court that we're going to talk about, which is not really over the merits of that, but over whether 3 separate federal district court judges had the right to issue injunctions stopping it nationwide. The Trump administration says no. They wanted to limit any decision in these 3 cases just to the plaintiffs in the individual cases, or maybe just to the states where those plaintiffs are. Whereas the people who want to maintain birthright citizenship say, no, you have to apply this broadly and it has to be stopped at a national level. So it is both an argument about the individual judges issuing national injunctions, but also there's the subtext behind it, which is this extraordinary challenge to a fundamental constitutional right. So, Emily, you listened to the arguments of the court. What stood out to you? Where does it look like the court is headed? What were the main islands that people were standing on?
I mean, I guess I think there were like maybe 3 positions. One was a position against these nationwide court orders. Then there was like a middle position that was
held by, and that's being like Thomas, Gorsuch, and
no, it wasn't clear where Gorsuch was exactly, which was sort of surprising because going into the argument, it seemed like Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, probably Kavanaugh were, and maybe other conservative justices really thought that these nationwide injunctions were a bad idea. But I think the reason that there was this no, then mushy middle, yes, sometimes, and then from the more liberal justices, especially Sotomayor and Justice Jackson, yes. I think the reason for that division was that this is a terrible case for the government to try to stop these national court orders through, because there's so much skepticism on the court that the president can just decree the end of birthright citizenship. And as Justice Kagan and others in the argument pointed out, if there are no nationwide injunctions from district courts, then what is the vehicle from preventing the government from denying citizenship to people for years, presumably, while the case wends its way through the courts in a more kind of orderly fashion? Yeah, so that was interesting. And just to back up and set the table a little bit, what we're talking about here is what the default rule should be when the government issues a new law, especially a new controversial law, right? So should the law go into effect? Or should people be able to say, hey, there is a constitutional problem with this law or a legal problem, and then block it so that while the questions of its legality are playing out, the law does not go into effect?
Wait, can I just stop you there? There's no law here. There's no law that's been passed.
Yes, executive orders are not laws, you're right, but they come under the same umbrella, right? So you can, as a plaintiff, go into court and ask for a national order, a national injunction against a duly enacted statute passed by Congress and signed by the president, or against an executive order. And that's what's at issue here in this case about birthright.
Mr. Dickerson, you have your finger up with the question.
Emily, would there be a difference between an executive order, which is one dude moving fast, and a law, which at least requires 2 other branches of government?
You could have that kind of rule. There isn't a clear reason, legally speaking, why that would be the distinction. So one of the problems with this case and the whole setup
There's no
here,
distinction between a congressionally passed law signed by the president and an executive order. There's no there's not one is not given much greater weight in the consideration of a court.
Well, that's a different question than is there a distinction that is obviously relevant for deciding the legality of a nationwide injunction, right? We're talking about whether it's legal to do this, not whether it's a good idea. The Supreme Court doesn't normally say to district courts, you can't do this because we've just decided we think it's a bad idea. So I think part of the whole question here is what is legally required or permitted versus what is a good idea. And that is, that's part of what's happening and why you guys are asking these questions.
Emily, can you just walk me through that difference again, just between what's legally possible and what's wise? Because I feel like this the president brings this up in other instances where he says, we can't give due process to all the migrants we're getting out of the country because we'd have 2 million court cases, and that doesn't make any sense. He's making it wouldn't be wise to have due process, but the judges and lawyers are saying, well, sorry, buddy, this is what you have to do. Is that at all analogous to what you've just said?
Well, sure. Yeah, it's sort of conceptually analogous. I mean, what I'm talking about is, let's back up here. So nationwide injunctions from district courts became like a much more common thing starting in the 1960s. There is some precedent for something like this that goes further back to at least 1910 and arguably earlier from the Supreme Court itself, right? We're talking about like, can a court do something very quickly to prevent action by the executive or by the executive plus Congress? And there have been other paths to doing that. And one of the things the court talked about today is whether they could go back to having more nationwide class actions, which might serve the same purpose, but be subject to a different set of limitations. And so all of those questions are about, like, what does the Constitution allow for? Where did this whole practice come from? What authority would the Supreme Court have for ending it or limiting it in some way? Could Congress step in and pass a statute limiting it? That's something that some of the Republican members of Congress have considered. That's the set of questions that is the legal set of questions, right? And then there's like a prudential policy set of questions like, is this a good idea? And that is different and not supposed to be what decides the case. It may color the outcome. We may think it does decide the case in the end, but we're supposed to be talking about law here, not like the more mushy what should happen.
Wait, I've lost what the it is what a good idea?
Is it a good idea to have nationwide injunctions, or is it a good idea for the Supreme Court to stop nationwide injunctions, or for Congress to jump in? Like, you can have lots of different conversations about what the right vehicle here is.
I mean, I think one of the problems here, of course, is that the speed at which the branches move is very different, and the speed at which courts can move is very different from the speed at which an executive branch move. The executive branch can move incredibly quickly when it wants to, and if the courts cannot somehow still that, if it is grotesquely violative of people's rights, then you really do end up with this temporal problem, a temporal discontinuity, like us being here right now.
Right. There's always a problem of time passing to get to the answer, right? So in some other world we would live in, like, the courts would be able to instantly adjudicate exactly all the precise legal questions on the merits and hand down a question immediately. But of course, that's not how it works. And so the big issue with nationwide injunctions is a procedural one. It's, do we want laws to snap into effect immediately, and then the courts can sort out their constitutionality or legality later, and then we'll change whatever we enacted later if there's a problem? Or do we want courts to be able to immediately block laws or executive orders from the elected branches so that we don't change the status quo before we know something's legal or not? And because this is the Trump administration, and we're having this discussion in a moment of the Trump administration, having hundreds of, I think it's like 160 executive orders and breaking a lot of stuff, this seems like a kind of partisan ideological question, but it's really not, right? I mean, the former Solicitor General of Texas wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal about why he thinks it's really important for courts to have this power of nationwide injunctions.
Why did the court move quickly, or did the court move very quickly to take this up, Emily? And why did it move quickly in this case, as opposed to, say, how quickly they might have moved in some other cases that would have seemed to call for it?
That's a great question. Of course, we don't really know the answer, but one of the speculative answers is they didn't really have much choice. Once the acting Solicitor General said, can you please weigh in on this question? And you have these nationwide injunctions in place, arguably the Supreme Court has a responsibility to decide whether it's appropriate to have those orders. But because the birthright citizenship order, taking away citizenship, is itself so controversial, it kind of had this like toxic effect from the point of view of the Trump administration on the argument today, in which it seemed like a whole bunch of the justices were very skeptical, like I said earlier, that this order is legal. And so asking them to get rid of the clear remedy for having it go into effect in this moment where they all think like, what what the hell? That's like a big demand. And that was a big problem for the Solicitor General. And so it felt like, while I would have predicted before argument that the court was going to do something about nationwide injunctions, if not get rid of them entirely, by the end, I wasn't sure, because they seemed to want to have some clear way to stop orders like exactly this one.
Funny. Oh, wow. So the inclination of the majority might be that they don't like nationwide injunctions, but when it comes to a way, but because this is about something that they all maybe, or a majority of them, disagrees with, which is to say getting rid of birthright citizenship, they're stuck.
Yeah, I mean, Justice Barrett seemed concerned about exactly that, and she's a kind of like center of the court person. It was harder to tell where Chief Justice Roberts was, but Gorsuch seemed troubled by, and not even Alito seemed to really want to defend this order on the merits. So that was pretty interesting. Now, you can imagine a world where the Supreme Court says something like, okay, well, we can still order nationwide injunctions. We have that power, but nobody else does. Or maybe we could go to something like the appellate courts. The circuit courts could do this, but not district courts. The thinking being, well, it takes at least 3 circuit court judges to issue such an order. And there is a kind of older history of doing it that way. So it's not like totally made up. Interestingly, however, the Solicitor General, John Sauer, said that it wasn't entirely clear that the Trump administration would follow the precedent that a circuit court set. He said, well, generally we would, but he would not commit to that. And Barrett seemed quite taken aback by that answer.
Is it clear that they are following the injunction that's been issued? Because they've just been issued by district courts.
Well, right. And a couple of them have been affirmed by circuit courts. And no, it is not actually clear that they've been following them. And so maybe that's part of why John Sauer didn't want to concede that point. But if you're saying to the Supreme Court, don't worry, you don't need these nationwide injunctions anymore from district court judges because we'll listen to the higher authorities. And then they say, well, actually, we're only going to listen to you, Supreme Court. That doesn't leave the Supreme Court feeling super confident, right? I mean, part of the subtext of this whole argument today is, what is the Trump administration doing in court? Does it still follow court orders the way other presidents have? Have we thrown what we've talked about before, the presumption of regularity, the idea that the government is going to basically follow the rules? Have we thrown that out the window? Because the more the Trump administration appears to be thinking in that vein, then that changes the answers the Supreme Court might give, right? Because it suggests that you're not playing with someone who's operating in good faith. And if you give them an inch, they will take a football field, which does indeed seem sort of like where we are.
What if they had applied that same thinking to the immunity question?
Oh, then we might have gotten a different answer to the immunity question. Right. I know it does all go back to that. I'm glad you brought that up.
John, from a political perspective, what do you think the Trump administration is doing with this case? Because they're obviously going to lose on the merits. There's no real ambiguity about that. They have a very poor legal argument, but they must somehow feel this is an important fight. They must feel like that this is an important issue. They must feel that it is it's worth losing on.
Yes, and yes. I think it checks a lot of wonderful boxes for them. One, at first people thought the immunity claim by the president was insane, and it turned out to work out really well for him. So why not throw the long ball? Second, this gets a ton of coverage, and anything that gets him coverage as being more maximalist on immigration restriction than thou is good for him both politically and sends a signal to anybody who would want to come into the country. So I think it works on those two grounds as well. And I don't think there's a downside in terms of, especially relative to the other things he's doing on immigration. I don't think there's any loss of support that he would risk. Much more likely to risk it by not, by disappearing people in El Salvadoran jails than make this, legal argument. So I think there's not a way in which it's a loser at all.
Emily, my last question for you is, if you did not know what the case was, this was not the case that you, Supreme Court Justice Bazelon, my mouth to God's ears on that one, that you are hearing on nationwide injunctions.
Set aside the merits.
Set aside the merits.
You would like to say.
What do you think the right order, the right rules for nationwide injunctions should be?
I mean, I'm sort of drawn, because I'm a mushy middle kind of person, to some kind of mushy middle. Let me explain why. What I don't love about nationwide injunctions is that everybody pretty much can find a district court judge who's on their side. And it's a kind of automatic block, like kind of no matter what. And that seems sort of dysfunctional to me. However, there are situations in which if you don't have nationwide relief, you don't really have any relief at all. I won't talk about the merits of this case, but you can kind of see how that could work in this case. And there also are situations in which if you don't have some kind of group mass remedy, you force every single person to go to court. And there are a million separate cases, and people who don't have lawyers and just don't have the savvy to get to court end up excluded, not because of the lack of justice of their cause, but just as a matter of resources. And I don't like that answer. So one kind of middle ground, and I'm not sure how legally supportable this is, but one is that you'd have a nationwide injunction in a case where that is the only remedy that gives your plaintiffs relief, right? That New Jersey, in this case, can go to court and say, well, our folks could move around. And if they don't have their birth certificates recognized and their social security numbers given to them, then they're going to be screwed wherever they are. And we're trying to protect them. I think that is a pretty good argument. What another thing that's sort of troubling potentially about nationwide injunctions is the idea that they bind people who were never in court in the first place. In other words, like, there are all these people, they weren't there arguing. How do we even know what they think? And they're affected by the order. So I feel like you could come up with some kind of middle ground in which you have fewer nationwide injunctions, but you still allow them. And I am not a big fan of the idea that only the Supreme Court could issue these kinds of orders. That seems like another form of dysfunction to me.
Washington is, to use a word of John Dickerson's, a buzz, I tell you, about original sin. President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again. A book by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, excerpted in The New Yorker this week. The book makes the case that Biden's frailty and decline were covered up by his staff and family until it was too late. That long delay then prevented the Democrats from finding a stronger presidential candidate and prevented Vice President Harris, who became the presidential candidate, of course, in lieu of Biden when he did drop out, from being able to run away from Biden's record, and that cost them the presidency. The New Yorker excerpt had a spicy moment where Biden did not recognize George Clooney at a fundraiser. It is kind of hilarious that the premise for mental acuity in the world is, can I recognize
Well, they
George
had
Clooney?
Also met several times, in fairness.
I was with two friends the other day who could not recognize Beyonce on a billboard. And I was like, do they have dementia, or are they just not attuned to the world I live in? Anyway, so John, I'm going to speechify for a second, and then you can respond to my speechify. I guess I feel like there are two ways of looking at this book. One is, this is a revelatory clearing of the air, finally facing the truth about Biden, and at least last holding people responsible for their terrible mistakes, which were devastating for the party. The other is, this is a kind of a lot of excuse making, and I told you so, from Democrats who don't want to be blamed for Harris's loss. They want to pin it on Biden instead of on the fact that Democrats had a poor message and a bad record. And it's also somewhat ridiculous because everyone knew Biden was unfeebled, so there was no cover-up.
Well, I think yes and yes is what the clever people would say. So I think both of those things can be true. I think there are a couple of things. One, let's get this boring point out of the way. If we focus more on how people actually govern than the campaign part of it, somebody should have said, wait a minute, it's a hard job. And he's clearly, while some moments he might be sharp and his wisdom is crucial, he's clearly not going to have the mental energy and acuity to manage this for 4 more years. And this ain't kidding around. And we got to solve this. This is big and important stuff. And they didn't do that. So there were insiders who saw things and could easily, because they're paid to, extrapolate where this was headed for another 4 years. And they didn't do what was in the best interest of the country. And that's worth having a clear-eyed look at. And in a way, the political question clouds it as it did in real time, because a question about whether he was up for the actual job got sidetracked by, well, do voters really care? And what does it mean to appear old and not old and all of those kinds of things? But then again, as you said, David, this is also one of those facts that the polling clearly showed people thought he was too old. And that, so it's not, because I think there's an interesting press question here too. I was kind of feeling like this idea that the press covered up reminded me a little bit of the idea that, the press covered up the fact there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. At some level, the press can only know so much and prove so much. So I think we should return to that question about the press. But I think you're right, David. But I think there's this extra quality, which is that the people inside who were in a position to know and position to do something and had a duty to do something didn't. And figuring out who they are is important.
Yeah, I also feel like it's worth dwelling on that. For one thing, to disincentivize it happening again, but also because, there's different interests here, right? So if you are the people close with Biden who have a great deal at stake in terms of your own power in him running again, then, bearing this hard news to him and talking him out of running again has a personal cost, which one imagines that has to factor into what happened, right? And just thinking that through, Jill Biden is emerging as a kind of villain in all of these narratives because she seems to be the most protective and the most willing to tell Biden that he can go ahead and keep going. And it just makes you realize that the people who are emotionally close and love the, president of the United States, the most powerful leader, should not be making these kinds of calls without some kind of accountability. And then there's also just this interesting gap that, yes, polls showed that people got this, but they kind of got it in spite of this inner circle of advisors. And that is something I think Democrats are really going to have to address. I think it's good to have this moment because I think people felt lied to. And that's part of why the party's brand and reputation is so tarnished right now.
I guess I think asking the who is responsible here is an interesting question, because I do not think really it has the who culpability belongs to his top aides or even to Jill Biden, who are, their job is to support the president. They had seen he had won as an old man in 2020. They saw him win again, or the Democrats win again in 2022. They knew his strengths and his wisdom. And that was their job. The who, to me, is the Democratic political leadership. It is Chuck Schumer. It's Nancy Pelosi. It is the people at the top of the Democratic Party who refuse to act on it. That it takes George Clooney, it takes an actor to write a piece in the New York Times to actually cause this conversation to happen. I really don't feel like there was a cover-up. I think the idea that there's a cover-up is, the White House worked around Biden's weaknesses, and they had him appear in times of the day when they knew he'd do better. But despite that, everyone could see that he was diminished and failing. And what happened was that the leaders of the Democratic Party, not Biden's top aides, the leaders of the Democratic Party chose to not make a big deal of it, chose to not put their careers on the line to try to get this thing fixed earlier. Pete Buttigieg could have quit as transportation secretary and said, this man is not capable of doing it. We have to find another solution. None of them chose to do it. And I think that's where the blame lies, not with his aides and not with Jill Biden, and not even with Biden himself.
I think part of that is fair. Just one quibble is, or maybe not, maybe more than a quibble. The aides don't work for, they work for him, but they work for the country.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
So that's now it may be asking aides too much.
But they're so close to him. I guess I would say they're so close to him, and so it is. They do have a sort of personal loyalty to him and to what they do see his capacity. They see his incapacities, but they also see his capacities.
But do we? The timing matters here, right? Do we know that? And maybe we do. Do we know that the Democratic leadership that's one circle removed from him, Schumer, Pelosi, et cetera, that they knew a year in advance of when we all of June? Yeah. Did they know a year in advance how bad things were? But what does no mean there?
Exactly,
David?
exactly. Because think about the couple. I think that's a great question, Emily. Also, cover up comes into play in two ways that I think were left out of your definition, David. One is they titrated Biden's exposure to the public and to congressional leaders and to members of his cabinet in a way that I think is perfectly reasonable evidence for cover-up, which is to say, keep him away from leaders of the party and from his cabinet because he doesn't have the stamina and energy and he'll show himself to be in a diminished capacity. I think that's perfectly reasonable grounds for asserting a cover-up. And also, we're not talking about just how he's doing on a Monday or Tuesday. We're talking about asking the country to reelect somebody for 4 more years who is on a clear path. And you have been in a position through the course of your entire career to watch that path and watch its rather precipitous decline right in front of you. And that's, yes, of course. I mean, this is not an easy call, but it's not like I think watching that easy path in front of you is pretty strong evidence that should prick the conscience.
And the thing about dementia too, or whatever was happening, whatever you want to call it, diminished cognitive capacity, is that you can excuse when you see someone being confused once, right? If you're just catching a glimpse. I mean, this happened even on the night of this fundraiser that completely freaked out George Clooney. Other people, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who'd organized a big Democratic fundraiser, he was like, well, Biden just needed 8 hours of sleep and he didn't get it. And so I'm just going to pretend that this doesn't really matter. But if you're a close aide and you're the person who is doing the strategizing you're both talking about in terms of limiting the president's hours and access, then you know that this is a regular occurrence. And that's a different level of knowledge about what was happening than what all of us saw.
And the campaigns, of course, turn things into binary choices. So you have aides who are making all these calculations, thinking about their personal loyalty to somebody they clearly love and who has shown, and who has been through extraordinary things in their life, and they've seen him weather that. And so all that emotion's going on. And then they clearly have strong feelings about Donald Trump being in the White House again, which isn't removed from this picture as well. And back to your point, David, about, everybody saw and everybody knew, it's knowing, okay, people saw and knew, but it really wasn't until the debate that it became some switch was thrown. And I wonder, because everybody had the feeling that he was too old before the debate, and then he had the debate, and then everything changed. So why did that change?
To your point, of course, it changed because the ways he had been hidden from us because he had not been allowed to expose that part of himself to the public because they had managed him. And I suppose you're saying that's the cover up. Yeah. I mean, I get that. The polling a year out was saying the majority of Democrats do not want Biden to be the nominee. So it was definitely not a secret. And the majority of Democrats were saying they didn't want him to be the nominee because he was too old. So it is very clearly in the air. Now as specifically as it was after the debate, no, but it was very clearly in the air. And I think I guess I would say there is a Democratic Party leadership that has the primary responsibility to sort of ask, how can we advance? How can we make sure Donald Trump is not elected, act in the best interest of the country? What is it that we can do? And we are the power. We are the Brahmins. We are the Mandarins. We are the people who have been elected and to lead the country and lead this party. And they seem to me have totally abdicated. The people, I understand why you guys are upset at the people around Biden and sure, I suppose they bear some culpability, but again, I think they are part of the Biden. Yes, they're supposed to serve the public, but they are part of Biden's circle. They have, as you say, they have seen him overcome obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And they have all this emotion tied up in it. And it's the people who have less emotion tied up in it who, are the ones who are going to have to govern if Biden loses, are going to have to serve if Biden loses, that had the obligation to think coolly and use their levers and their pressure to make a change. And they declined to do it. They declined.
I mean, I think you're making a case for why it is more likely that the second circle would be the ones to step in, which eventually, obviously, they did. But I don't buy the idea that the insiders had any less of a moral case for why they should have acted sooner. And I think the best argument you can make for them, which they are still making, is that they thought Biden was an effective president and that the president is not a person. It's a group of people who are managing the country effectively. And what they had from Biden was enough direction that they could do their jobs well. And honestly, just saying that out loud makes me a little ill because it's so hubristic. It's not how leadership is supposed to work, that like it's automated in some way. And then you have someone who is in pretty serious decline for 4 more years, like John was saying, and you just decide that's okay because you think you know what your marching orders were when you weren't elected.
Well, that's a good point. You also have probably a collective action problem too,
yes,
which is like who's going to step forward. And again, if you're living in a world where you believe that if Donald Trump is given power again, he will become the first American authoritarian president, then are you going to raise your hand when, as you say, Emily, and there is a perfectly, presidencies should, when they're run in the best possible way, they are a team. You have a president who gives guidance like a good CEO, but they don't, they're not down in the weeds. And so you can have a rational response, a rational view of the presidency in which a president who's not able to do cartwheels through the Rose Garden is nevertheless still effective. And you can have this feeling about Donald Trump, which is not without evidence. I totally see how it can be a tough call, but I don't think it removes the obligation to make the call, especially when you think about, you're not talking about just whether he can make it through today. It's whether he can make it through 4 more years when super serious stuff's going on. I would add one other thing, is that there is evidence that he was in an ongoing fashion managing the situation in Ukraine, managing to get U.S. hostages released,
yes,
that there was counterweights. So for every bad episode that somebody might cite, there do seem to have been episodes of an ongoing nature in which he was acting effectively, which I'm sure made the decision even harder.
Right. And in real time, as that's all happening and things are changing, but maybe in front of your eyes in a way you can't see, every time you have one of those effective episodes, I imagine you don't think about, well, what's this going to look like in 2 to 4 years? You're just like getting through it. And then it must have seemed to them in the moment like it would have been like an earthquake to be like, I'm sorry, you can't run again, even though in retrospect, that seems like it was so obviously the right call to make in like 2023, if not, the end of 22.
One other point I would note is one of the problems with having a gerontocracy is that you have a bunch of old people who are unwilling perhaps to tell other old people to kick it out. And, Schumer is no spring chicken. Nancy Pelosi, I think, is older than Biden, certainly, in his age range. A lot of the other top Democrats in 2023 were very, very old and are probably, temperamentally less willing. Maybe they're not temperamentally less willing just to tell him he's got to leave. And I think that was a problem. Let's go to cocktail chatter. When you doddering old fool, Emily Bazelon, you're doddering around your house, barely able to maintain a thought, what are you going to be chattering wanly to your husband about?
Well, if you actually want some distraction, my friend Jake Halpern, who has this podcast called Deep Cover for Pushkin, has a new season out called The Truth About Sarah, which I recommend. It's like engrossing, and it's about a huge liar, someone who lied about her military service. And it's kind of fascinating how she took everyone in around her. And it's just an excellent distraction. So you could check that out. What I'm kind of fascinated by this week that we didn't talk about is how Congress seems to be kind of sticking up for the Library of Congress. It turns out if you call a Washington institution after Congress and then you try to execute a takeover of it, as President Trump has done by firing the head of the Library of Congress and the Copyright Office and sending in Todd Blanche, who's his number 3, I think, in the Justice Department. Well, maybe Congress actually will say, hey, wait a second, we're supposed to confirm that person, and we're not going to just hand over all the copyright records of tremendous value and the Library of Congress and its archive to DOJ. which is what was planned. So interesting to watch that it is actually possible for Congress to, in some small way at least, put the brakes on something that DOJ is trying to do. And I will be watching to see how that plays out.
John Dickerson, what's your chatter?
I usually allow the announcement of baby names to pass by me as I focus on other high-minded things in my effort to be as publicly pious as possible. But I was struck by the release of baby names. First of all, Olivia and Liam are consistently the two most popular names for boys and girls, according to data from the Social Security Administration. Olivia has been the number one name for girls for like 6 years running. Liam, I think some similar thing. But that's not really the point of all of this. The point is two things. One of the fastest rising names for boys from a previous rank of like 12,910 to like 991. So it's still not top of mind, but nevertheless has traveled a great distance, is the name Truce, Truce. So that's that interesting.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
Neither have I. Second thing is that according to NPR, the name in red states that is also achieving greatness are variants of oak. So Oakley, or spelled Oaklee, Oakley, Oakleigh, and that it's not quite clear based on my reading of why this is the case, that oak-based names are moving up in the rankings, except that in red states, maybe oak feels sort of strong and solid and kind of, I don't know, sort of traditional.
What about Oakleys? Don't people wear a lot of Oakleys?
There is also the theory. Thank you there is also that theory as well, which is that the purchasing of Oakleys and wearing of them is over-indexed for red states, and that this is connected to that. There's also an argument, which I
that's why understand. Organic banana has become a really popular name in blue states. Also,
right. The Mormon Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, encourages or promotes or people are okay with names that are non-traditional, and that this might have come through that as well. So names that were once out of the mainstream, like Jaden and Caden, have become popular within LDS, and this might also be a part of that too. In other words, they're more entrepreneurial when they pick baby names, and then they become popular within that world group. So I don't know, but to all of you Oakleys out there, or just people who wear Oakleys, welcome to the world.
I mean, Liam and Olivia both seem to be pop culture. Liam from One Direction, Olivia Rodrigo also. I would say those are pop culture driven. I love these weird new names. I love them. Couldn't be more happy. So great to have people with funny names and new sounding names. And
I agree.
Do you have any limits on that?
Truce.
No, you have no limits. Like, you don't think that Elon Musk's whatever that is name for his kid goes a little far?
Well, that's like using the Nazi analogy. Like,
well, I'm just saying. I know that you're being nice and celebratory and inclusive, but like, I feel like there's a limit here.
I think naming someone a number is a weird, or whatever that one, a symbol. But like having some funny nickname, like I can't remember, what is that kid's name?
I don't know. It's like a string of symbols and letters.
But they call him something.
Yeah, I don't know.
They call him like Exy or something. Like Exy. What a great name, Exy.
I guess.
My chatter is about so I love this email newsletter I get from the website Moss and Fog.
Yay!
Which John turned me on to. John turned me on to it.
Sign up for that.
And actually, this is maybe a Dickersonian chatter, and I saw there was a piece this week about how Maine is about to get a new tall building. The tallest building in Maine is about to be replaced by a new tower in Portland's Old Port Square. It's going to be like a lighthouse shaped skyscraper, well, modest skyscraper, 30-story skyscraper. And that will now become the tallest building in Maine, replacing a church, which is the current tallest building in Maine. That got me interested in what states have the shortest, tallest buildings. So what states have the shortest, tallest buildings? John.
What states have the shortest, tallest buildings? Oklahoma.
No.
Damn.
You get Emily. Do you want to make a guess?
I just feel like my mind
Oh,
is a
DC.
blank.
DC. Well, it's not a state.
No.
Sorry.
Also, DC has the
state?
Washington Monument, and
I know, but I thought 13 stories would be.
Yeah, although we have the Capitol is still taller than that because they allow that to be tall. Anyway,
I mean, I feel like it could be so many states. Go ahead.
Well, it actually turns out to be low population states. So Vermont is third. There's a 199-foot tower in Rutland, a church tower. South Dakota is second. It has a 174-foot, 11-story tower in the CenturyLink Tower in Sioux Falls, and the shortest, tallest building is in Wyoming. There's an 11-story, 148-foot tall building in Cheyenne for the Wyoming Financial Center. It's so short, like 148 feet. That's so tiny. Yet it's the tallest building in the whole state of Wyoming. That whole huge state of Wyoming.
They have mountains, though. They don't need tall buildings.
It's
They have
true.
a real thing.
It's true.
Just go to the Tetons. It's awesome and super high.
They've built a skyscraper named a Teton 7 stories high. They've gone about as far as they can go. All right. Listeners, you have sent us great chatters. Please keep them coming. Email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. And our listener chatter this week comes from John Cahill in Skokie.
Chicago is abuzz as People's Gas replaces a 164-year-old pipe in the South Loop. Quote, the 2,000-pound pipe has been in use since 1861, the year Abraham Lincoln took office as president and the Civil War started. The pipe had already been there when the Great Chicago Fire was raging blocks away, end quote. The pipe has served its mission, but it's too corroded to continue. It will have an active retirement at a People's Gas lab where it will be studied to improve the durability of new construction materials. You can file this with Strode's and other infrastructure chatters, or alongside Dick Durbin and Jan Schakowsky as local institutions that finally chose to retire in 2025.
Don't think your Oklahoma lyric there got past me, just FYI.
I wouldn't expect it to. We're not the only Slate podcast worth listening to this week. The Amicus podcast has Kara Swisher as a guest. She joins Dahlia Lithwick to talk about tech giants' encroachment on government oversights and the implications for AI and cryptocurrency. Kara is always so interesting and so provocative. And she is talking to Dahlia on SCOTUS Meet the Broligarchs. And also on that episode, there's a lovely tribute to Justice David Souter from a former Souter clerk and from Dahlia. So check out SCOTUS Meet the Broligarchs on Amicus. That's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the Trump administration's weird decision to admit only white South Africans as refugees. That's just for Slate Plus members, who also get discounts to our live shows, bonus episodes. They never hit the paywall on the Slate site, so much more. So if you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, you can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That's our show for today. The researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations for Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson and David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.